I frequently speak of transparent watercolor, and I title my videos as such. Just what do I mean when I'm speaking of transparent watercolor? Several people have written me asking that question. They want to know if the brand of paint they're using is transparent watercolor. The Transparent Watercolor Society of America, as the name would indicate, is one of the leading watercolor organizations when speaking of transparent watercolor. They're dedicated to advancing the stature and fostering the appreciation of transparent watercolor. Every year, the Transparent Watercolor Society of America has a very prestigious annual show, and they set guidelines for what they accept as transparent watercolor. And they monitor this very closely. They scrutinize every entry to make sure it complies with their guidelines. I'm going to use the guidelines set forth by the Transparent Watercolor Society, also known as TWSA, for an explanation of my video because my thoughts and my beliefs and practices line up with their guidelines. There's two main factors involved with determining whether or not a painting is a transparent watercolor or not. And the first one is the use of white paint. White paint is opaque by its nature. Any painting that uses white paint is not considered a transparent watercolor. The second factor is the way the paint is applied to the paper. It should be applied in a transparent manner. So even though some watercolor paints have some opacity and are considered partially opaque, such as cadmiums, as long as they are applied in a transparent manner, they meet the requirement for a transparent watercolor. So it's not about the brand that determines whether or not you're painting with transparent watercolor. All artist grade watercolors applied in a transparent manner meet the criteria for being considered transparent watercolors. The materials that aren't acceptable for being a transparent watercolor are acrylic, gouache, casein, ink, paints with metallics in it. Those don't meet the criteria for being considered a transparent watercolor. It's not about the color of paint you're using or the pigment in your paint. Again, if you're using watercolors and you're applying them in a transparent manner, then it's considered a transparent watercolor, even if it's got some opacity, such as a cadmium. So now let's talk about the application of the paint. What I have here is alizarin crimson watercolor, and I'm applying it not in a transparent manner. It's actually very thick, almost as it's coming out of the tube, with just a little bit of water. And here I'm doing the same with cerulean blue. You can see how thick it is, and you can see there's no reflection of light coming off the paper, which is the essence of transparent watercolor. So even though I'm using watercolor, I'm not applying this paint in a transparent manner. So here next I'm applying cadmium yellow, and you can see there's no light reflection there. And here I'm applying a cadmium red. Again, you can't see any reflection of light. You really can't tell here whether I'm using watercolor, acrylic, or gouache because I'm painting in a very opaque manner. I'm not using the white of the paper to get the reflection of light at all. Now I'm going to apply the same paint off the same palette, the same colors. However, I'm going to apply them in what is referred to as a transparent manner. You can see I've added water to it, and even though it's pretty dark tone there, there's still reflection of light. And now here's the cerulean blue, and you can see some of the white of the paper coming through. Now I'm applying the cadmium yellow, and you can see the colors starting to mingle and run together. Now I'm adding the cadmium red, and you see how these paints are mingling, and you see the water. I can gradate this, and you see the light reflection coming out of the paper. This is applying the watercolor in a transparent manner compared to what's on the left, which is not being applied in a transparent manner. It's very thick, you can't see the reflection of light, even though it's the very same watercolor paint. So you can see the difference in the two applications. The one on the right is what would be considered transparent watercolor. Another indicator that you're applying it in a transparent manner is you often will see the texture of the paper coming through in the transparent manner, whereas when you're painting it thick and opaque, you can't even see the texture of the paper. So why does it matter? When you look at this painting, you can see the luminosity and the reflection of light that's happening. It's a quality that you can only get with transparent watercolor. Ed Whitney, who many of today's top watercolorists studied under, describes transparent watercolor as white paper showing through a transparent wash is the closest approximation of light in all media, and the light is the loveliest thing that exists. I would not have been able to achieve the luminosity that I have in this painting by mixing my whites with white paint. Transparent watercolor is the only way to get this reflection of light in this luminous quality. My paintings in my video center around transparent watercolor, so I thought it was important to include this in my series of tips just to eliminate any confusion. I hope you have the same appreciation for transparent watercolors that myself and many others have. Painting in a transparent style can be challenging at times and requires some planning, but in the end, it can be very rewarding.